And welcome to Weather Geeks. I'm Dr. Marshall Shepard, and I am so honored to have with us today someone that's been here before, and we wanted to have him back to catch up what's going on, Congressman Bob Inglis, and he's the executive director of, I guess you call it, republicen.org, and he's also a former congressman. He's been a congressman in South Carolina's 4th District. Now, you are a conservative. You told me last time you've got all the A ratings for your conservative credentials. How did a conservative from South Carolina become a crusader for climate change?
Well, a 3-step metamorphosis. You know, start with my son saying that he'd vote for me, but I needed to clean up my act on the environment. That was 2004. And then a trip to Antarctica with Science Committee, and then another Science Committee trip. And being challenged by an Aussie climate scientist who saw himself as loving God and loving people by conservation changes he was making in his life. So those 3 steps, and this climate disputer became somebody who says it's real, let's do something about it.
Now, just to set the record straight, you still consider yourself a conservative.
Correct.
No doubt about it. And Republic EN, tell us a little bit about what that organization is trying to do. And you're on a 10-city tour right now, is that right?
Yeah, we're conservatives reaching conservatives on climate change, trying to convince conservatives that there's a free enterprise answer with a slightly smaller government, just leveling the playing field, bringing accountability for all the cost of all the fuels, eliminating all the subsidies, and then watching the free enterprise system deliver innovation in that accountable world. The problem we've got now is a problem of economics that means that fossil fuels especially aren't accountable for their costs. They're imposing on us by health costs, by climate damages. If you put those on the meter and on the pump, then we, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, seek innovative products. Without subsidies, but rather just accountability and a level playing field.
Yeah. Now, you know, I'm sure some people are listening to this conversation like, yeah, that sounds like some kind of tax to me.
Oh, yes.
Carbon tax. I mean, but the reality is that's gaining some traction, not just even among you. I hear the discussion among conservatives and others out there right now. Where are we, and is that what you're trying to convey on your 10-stop tour?
Correct. It is a tax. Yeah. It's a carbon tax, and of course, I've just spoken, and the words have not. The earth has not swallowed me yet, Marshall. So I'm in good shape so far. Yeah. But it seems like something strange for a conservative to say.
It really does.
But then when you combine it with a cut in existing taxes, dollar for dollar, or a dividend of all that tax money from the carbon tax back to the citizenry, and then apply the tax to imports. If you do those 2 things, give the money back and apply it to imports, then you get the whole world in on this without any international agreement, just a bold move by the United States. But yet it starts with a carbon tax. But since we're conservatives, we don't want to grow the government. You got to give me a dollar for dollar tax cut somewhere else, or a dividend, and then apply it to imports.
You know, you told me that as this is airing, you're probably sitting in, I guess, Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah. You've been various places around the country. How did you pick those places, and what are you hoping to achieve?
We're looking for red zip codes, you know, conservative zip codes, and so because that's what our calling is at republicen.org, is to reach conservatives and to say, you know what, you're really good at this. You know the answer to climate change. And up until now, you've been struggling with this inferiority complex.
Let me jump in on that, because I've heard you say at times it's actually against conservative principles to ignore the risk of climate change. Yeah. Can you expand on that?
Well, it is. It's like proceeding pell-mell in the face of risk is anything but conservative. It's actually very liberal or something. I don't know what it is. It's irresponsible. I mean, if you're a conservative, you want to weigh the risk and realize that we are at risk for climate damages and for health costs associated with the burning of fossil fuels. So why not bring accountability for those costs? Put them on the power meter, put them at the pump, and then let's see how the free enterprise system delivers innovation. And so what we're finding is young conservatives, especially young people of faith, are very much with us. Their parents have a little bit harder time with it, and their grandparents hardest for us to reach just yet.
I was going to ask you about that because I could imagine in the places that you go and the people you're talking to, there is a range of reaction to what you're talking about, because they might say you're sounding like a liberal in sheep's clothing, in sheep's clothing or wolf's clothing, whatever you want to say. But it's interesting because I followed your messaging. I actually think that the way you're approaching things is probably how we're going to do it. I wanted to get your opinion on something because I've seen something called the Climate Solutions Caucus emerge in Congress. And I think right now there's 60 members, 30 Republicans, 30 Democrats. That sounds to me like there's sort of coming together, at least even in the midst of perhaps a very partisan viewpoint on climate change right now.
Yeah, it's really exciting. This is something that particularly the Citizens Climate Lobby is doing, along with some help from the Quakers and others. And so the idea is it's a Noah's Ark principle. You got to join 2 by 2. And so it's a Republican and Democrat can join.
Bring one together, you can't come alone.
And so it's balanced, and it's people looking for solutions. What we hope they would do is eventually put forth legislative proposals that would address climate change using the power of free enterprise. And again, we think that's accountability through a carbon tax paired with a reduction of other taxes applied to imports, and then you get the whole world in on it.
Now, when you were in Congress, I've heard your story, and I think that perhaps you believe that part of your stance on climate change may have gotten you elected out of office, if you will. Do you feel now, though, when we see the growing sort of caucus that we just talked about, is it less politically risky, perhaps, for conservative to talk responsibly about climate change?
It is. It's much different now. You know, when I got tossed out in 2010, it was the darkest days of the Great Recession. Now the economy's better. People are feeling a little bit more in control. And so it should be easier for a member of Congress to address climate change now. And of course, our role at republicen.org is to say, listen, we'll go on talk radio for you. We'll take the arrows, and we'll be the pioneers that take the arrows. You be the settlers that take the land, you know? And so we want to fulfill that role of helping explain it to rock-solid conservatives that this is what we believe really works.
Yeah, and when we come back, we're going to talk about an island that Congressman Inglis visited, and they may be some of the harbingers of climate change. Next on Weather Geeks, but first, our Geek of the Week.
This week's Geek of the Week is Jared Rennie, research meteorologist at Cooperative Institute for Climate and Satellites in North Carolina. Heavy snow falling on a calm, cold night is Jared's favorite type of weather, and so it's no surprise that the 1997 April Fool's Day blizzard is his most memorable weather event. Jared also enjoys traveling and exploring new cities and goes to school to teach kids the importance of math, science, and computer programming. Now that's a real geek. Congratulations, Jared Rennie, our Geek of the Week!
And we are back on Weather Geeks, and I'm talking with Congressman Bob Inglis, who has represented the 4th District of South Carolina and is a card-carrying conservative talking about climate change. And you recently visited Tangier Island, somewhere in the Chesapeake Bay. They're starting to see, and even the residents admit they're starting to see sea level rise and the impacts, but yet 8 in 10 of those residents voted for President Trump, who has some different perspectives on climate change. What did you see?
Well, it's really an interesting opportunity to relearn something, Marshall. I should have known it, but I really saw it there again. In order to change minds, you got to open minds, and the key to opening them is to show respect. And so I went there expecting a real battle, you know, with these Trump voters that were denying the impacts of climate change. And when I got there, I found a really wonderful mayor of Tangier, who's a very thoughtful fella, who's trying really to preserve a way of life. And I think that if I were there and I was going to lose my island, my whole way of life, I'd want it to be erosion, which is what he thinks it is, rather than sea level rise. I'd be in the same spot, I think. So coming to that understanding helped me to be a little bit more careful with the way I presented the message there, that we got to show respect to people who aren't yet convinced. especially if they're not convinced, because it would be such an indication of change to their way of life,
Right.
and that's the case for them.
Yeah, I think some psychological studies have also talked about that. You've got to kind of meet people where they are, and I think
Right.
we all can learn from that. Catherine Hayhall also talks about values and reaching people where they are on their values.
Yeah,
and
it's all about respect, and
Yeah.
really that's what I relearned at Tanger. I should know it by now, but I had to relearn it at Tanger this summer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is the human issue. This is something where it's not us against them or winners and losers. We're all in
Right.
this together. In fact, there was a new study just out by Georgia State University down the road from where we're sitting that says really people identify and have political opinions about climate change based on who they identify with politically, whether they're Republican or
Right.
Democrat. They affirmed that in a study. What are your thoughts on a study that shows that?
Yeah, this has been culturally marked, so if you're talking about climate change, it's assumed that you must be a liberal Democrat.
Right.
And so what we live to do at republicen.org is change that marking to say, no, as you just said, we're literally in this together.
Right.
And
there's no plan B planet.
right.
And I think even Scripture talks about being stewards of the planet. So
Absolutely. And what the country needs and the whole world needs is us as conservatives to deliver solutions that will work. It's clear that progressives had said we need to do something.
right.
But conservatives need to come forward with solutions based in free enterprise that work, and that's what we do at republicen.org.
I want to get your thoughts. We've got about a minute left on us pulling out of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts there, and what do we do going forward?
We're very disappointed because it established a will, not a way, but all the countries of the world were in on it, except us in Syria.
Yeah, no, because Nicaragua was in that camp, but they recently joined, so
Yeah.
it's just us in Syria now.
So it's us on the sidelines sort of sniveling. And I've never seen my country as being on the sidelines sniveling. I see us on the field leading toward a solution.
Right.
And that's where we need to be.
Yeah, and so you think we can achieve the goals without the Paris Agreement, or are you hopeless?
I'm actually, there's a silver lining, and that is some people call it the Trump bump. We're getting some people that are interested in it because they're worried about nobody in the federal government focusing on this.
Yeah.
And so it may actually end up helping us as people say, you know what, we really do want somebody working on this.
And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the actions going forward, and does it leave us at a competitive disadvantage not being engaged as a nation? Next on Weather Geeks. And we're back on Weather Geeks talking with Congressman Bob Inglis, who I really believe is a game changer because he is trying to depoliticize the notion of climate change, and we really appreciate that. And thank you for your service to the country for doing that. I alluded to this as we went to the break. Are we hurting ourselves as a country by not being engaged, by you noted being not leaders on this? Are we now at a competitive disadvantage, or the Chinese and others getting ahead of us on technology, renewables? What are your thoughts?
We're really at risk of that, yes. I mean, this is a strange place for us to be. Usually America leads. I can understand why some think we should rest a little while, like President Kennedy said at Rice in September '62. He can understand why some people say we should wait and rest, but he goes on to say the country wasn't built by those who waited and rested.
And do we have time to wait on this particular issue?
We don't. And you know better than anybody about that, about how we really don't have time to wait. And so, but it could be really something, Marshall, if the Chinese start leading and get out way in front of us on this. For example, the carbon tax that I'm talking about that's paired with a dollar for dollar reduction of other taxes or a dividend plus a border adjustment where it's applied to imports. What if they apply that to us?
Exactly.
We may be responding to their leadership
Right.
rather than them responding to ours.
Right.
And so it could be sort of a Sputnik moment, speaking of President Kennedy. He was able to unite the country behind this goal of going to the moon.
That's right.
It could be that the Chinese say, you know what, you Americans, when you bring stuff in here, you're going to have to pay a border tax.
Right.
That might wake us up to the reality that somebody else is going to lead this unless we do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And that pivots me to thoughts on what I'm seeing now in some of our federal agencies and scientists perhaps being censored and all kinds of interesting things going on. Mm-hmm. Are you bothered by that? As a former congressman and as a citizen, are you bothered by sort of the mood within some of our federal structure?
Yeah, I'm very concerned because, you know, after 9/11, George Bush took some heat for saying, go shop. Actually, it wasn't such bad advice because the idea was don't give in to the terrorists, go about your life. So, but reason we were able to do that is we knew that there were some great people 24/7 studying on our national security and keeping us safe. Now then, there's sort of a sense that nobody in the federal government is addressing climate change. That's a very naked, exposed feeling. It's actually sort of driving people to us at republicen.org because people are saying, gee, Manee, we want somebody to be doing something on this. Right. And so we see a silver lining there, but we wish for it to be that the federal government were really in on this thing and driving and leading to the future, because that's really where America deserves to be.
Right, and I think we are seeing leadership from local and state officials, organizations like Republican and others, so I think that's encouraging. Last 30 seconds or so, if you were advising President Trump, what advice would you give him?
That this can be done consistent with his policy of putting America first, that America leads, and the rest of the world's going to follow, and by the way, China's going to pay the tax. And so it doesn't require an international agreement. All it requires is bold leadership by the United States, so he could make it fit with the way that he says it.
Right. In 5 seconds, what's next for you?
Continuing until we win this. We got to win at republicen.org and get this solution in on free enterprise on climate change.
I think that's where we have to end it, and thank you once again for joining us on Weather Geeks. I think we've seen that it's not a left-right issue, it's a human issue. I say that often, and I think Congressman Inglis actually personifies that. We're here every Sunday on Weather Geeks. You can also find us on Twitter at WX Geeks TWC, and we're on Facebook. Thanks, and we'll see you next week on Weather Geeks.
What makes me a weather geek, the fact that I love the weather, especially when it's hit me in the side of the face.
I'm gonna ride this one out, guys.
Be one of the thousands of weather geeks out there at weloveweather.tv.